Setting the table for peace. That's President Trump's goal for his one-on-one meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin today.
President Trump hopes the summit in Alaska will lead to direct talks between Putin and Ukraine's President Zelensky. He admits, though, that there's a 25% chance the negotiations could fail. CBN Washington correspondent Jenna Browder reports.
The day is here. President Trump and Vladimir Putin meeting face-to-face in Anchorage, Alaska. The goal, to bring warring Russia and Ukraine together and usher an end to the years-long conflict. On the eve of the summit, both men set the stage. Putin praising Trump for his energetic and sincere efforts to stop the hostilities and reach agreements. He also said the meeting could include discussions on a potential nuclear arms deal. In Washington, President Trump not ruling out that topic, but saying his focus is on ending the war.
I think that President Putin would like to see a deal. I think if I weren't president, he would take over all of Ukraine. But I am president, and he's not going to mess around with me.
However, he believes there's a 25% chance these talks could fail. If that happens, he's promised severe consequences for the Kremlin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is not invited to the meeting. He believes Putin is bluffing, as Russian forces are pushing to gain more territory in Ukraine ahead of any agreement. President Trump hopes this meeting will lead to another, including both sides in the days ahead.
All I want to do is set the table for the next meeting, which should happen shortly. I'd like to see it happen very quickly, very shortly after this meeting. I'd like to see it actually happen maybe in Alaska, where we just stay, because it's so much easier.
President Trump left Washington, D.C. early this morning. The meeting is later this afternoon at a U.S. military base, followed by a bilateral lunch and a joint news conference. Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Well, CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas has reported from some of the most devastated areas of Ukraine since the Russian invasion. We actually got used to watching him in war zones and worrying about, is he safe? But he's here with us now. He's safe now. So, George, tell us, what was Russia's overall goal in the invasion?
Yeah, I mean, it was, we talk quite often, Gordon, on this show, and you say this quite often. When you listen to the words of Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, Hamas, Hezbollah, when they talk about wanting to wipe Israel off the face of the map, from the hallways of the regime in Iran to Saudi Arabia to others, we have to listen to what Putin's aspiration has been, and it has been for a very long time. He has this idea of reconstituting the old former Soviet Union. In fact, he said quite several years ago, he said the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. Imagine, there were a lot of catastrophes back in the 20th century. He said the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this is a man who, to his very core, believes that Ukraine is very much a part of Russia. And in fact, Trump said that this is going to be a listening exercise. I wouldn't doubt that Putin, in his one-on-one in Anchorage, will try to, this former KGB agent, will try to persuade Trump to say, you know what? We have a claim to Ukraine. Ukraine is part of us. Ukrainians and Russians are one. We speak one language. We're of the same people. Ukraine belongs to us. That has been his goal for the entire time. And we have a map here. Since 2022, you see what the Russians have been managed to do. These 4 provinces, he's going to try to convince Trump. Right now, 70% of Kherson, 73% of Zaporizhia, 76.3% of Donetsk, and 99.5% of Luhansk is under Russian territory. That little bit pieces of those 4 provinces, he is going to try to convince Donald Trump to get the Ukrainians to pull their forces back, and that he would control the entire southeast quadrant. Initially, when the war started back in 2014, the Donbas region, Luhansk and Donetsk, those were the 2 main central regions. Since 2014, the Russians have managed to go all the way down to Zaporizhia. Why is Zaporizhia important? Today, it is home to Europe's largest nuclear station, down to Kherson. Once they have all 4 provinces, Gordon, then they can create this land bridge all the way from Russia down to Crimea. It gives them total access to the sea, the Black Sea, and that would be huge.
Well, that's been a long time Russian goal, to have a warm water port.
Exactly.
That's been, you can go back to the Tsars, and that's what they've wanted, a warm water port. Crimea was always central to that. And so that land bridge, but that's one piece, but the aspiration is all of Ukraine. It's not just that land bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you reconcile that Putin would say, okay, I'll take the land bridge for peace? Can he even do that?
Well, I mean, he's pretty close. Look at the statistics, the percentages that I just gave you. 70%, almost 90% of Luhansk. He's almost there. The Ukrainians have put up, Gordon, a terrific fight since 2014. And they've managed to hold, these very important strategic areas of the east as well as the southeastern. What he's going to try to convince Trump, there's whoever gets the last ear of Trump, that's kind of like where the Zelensky and the European Union, they've been trying to convince Trump, listen, you've got to hold Putin. You've got to get him to stop firing his intercontinental ballistic missiles, thousands of these Iranian-made drones, and then come to a settlement that basically says to the Ukrainians, listen, you've lost all this part of the east and the south. You have to live with this. The Ukrainians will come back and say, you know what, I think we might be able to live with this, but you have to give us a security guarantee. You've got to guarantee that if the Russians decide to later on launch a massive military offensive to get more territory, that the United States with the European Union and whoever else needs to come to our rescue. Also,
can Zelensky actually do that? He said repeatedly he can't give up any Ukrainian territory. So what you're asking him to do, from his point of view politically, is impossible. Are you saying they'd trade NATO membership, which from a Russian standpoint is a non-starter?
But you know what? Zelensky is going to keep pushing that button. Obviously, it's a far-fetched, it's not a possibility right now because the conditions right now, it's all about getting to a ceasefire and to get these both sides to come together. Listen, you have to understand, Donald Trump doesn't really like President Zelensky. Vladimir Putin hates Zelensky. And so you've got these two leaders who have basically ganged up against Zelensky. Zelensky is trying to hold the territorial integrity of his nation. Just imagine another country has invaded a European nation, the largest nation on the European continent. And now the President Trump is trying to have a negotiation with this man who has a history with his KGB background, has a history of trying to persuade world leaders, trying to think that they have a cozy relationship, but yet he continues to bombard all parts of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians continue to suffer.
What's going on with the Russian population? I hear from families in Ukraine that have members on both sides of the border. And they're saying our Russian relatives, these are blood family, are telling us, well, you deserve it. You deserve the invasion. What you were doing, you were embracing Nazi ideology, and you've deserved this invasion.
You are very familiar, and so is Terry. We have a beautiful office in Kyiv, and when the war started back in 2014, and I happened to be in Crimea the day the Russians had invaded. The Ukrainian office for CBN is very typical of the complexity of this part of the world. You have Ukrainians who are married to Russians, wives are Russians, husbands are Russians. There's that commingling of cultures. They're very, very close in culture. Those on the eastern part of Ukraine and the eastern part of Russia, they're very pro-Russian. I mean, they're very pro-Russian. So were the folks in the Crimea region. But the rest of the country is hemorrhaging. I mean, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have lost their lives. Their economy, because of the sanctions currently, is hemorrhaging. So Putin comes to this conference today knowing that his economy is suffering. He's losing tens of thousands of men. The fact that the Ukrainians have been able to withstand this since 2014 is absolutely remarkable. But the pain is on both sides. A recent Gallup poll just in the last couple of days, 65% of Ukrainians go. They say obviously they're tired of the war. But when it comes to the territorial integrity of their nation, They want to hold on to it.
Well, you keep going back to the war started in 2014,
Yeah.
which is the Obama administration.
Correct.
That was the
Exactly.
annexation of Crimea, and I think the West blinked
Absolutely. They did.
and allowed
Absolutely
it to
they did.
happen.
Yep.
And then there were security guarantees given to Ukraine.
Yep.
There was pledges made by Russia of non-aggression.
Yep.
All of that was broken in what I'll call phase 2 of this war.
Yep.
So there was a ceasefire, there was a peace agreement, there was a non-aggression treaty that was signed, and everyone thought it was over.
Yeah.
But then
Then 2022 came.
right. So
if,
why do you keep linking it back to 2014?
Because in the hearts and minds of Ukrainians, Gordon, they say, listen, we had the Budapest, I go back. We had the Budapest Agreement when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and all these former Soviet republics broke away. Ukraine, which had the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in Europe, said, we will give up our nuclear weapons if the United States and the Western world will guarantee our security and our protection against the Russians. That was called the Budapest Memorandum. It was not codified by U.S. Congress, but it was a critical piece of paper. That was negated. We had the Minsk I agreement you talked about, the Minsk II agreement, and now we have another chance for a treaty. Do you think the Ukrainians are going to say, hey, all these agreements that we had, we asked you for the protection of our territorial integrity, and you have not delivered? And here we are, we've lost a third of our nation, and Vladimir Putin wants to take over the entire country. What is the guarantee that he won't continue to go further? That is what is today at the heart of Zelensky when he comes to this meeting. And the fact that he is not at the table speaks volumes to Ukrainians today.
All right. Well, thanks for the analysis. Sure. It's certainly going to be a fascinating meeting to watch in Alaska. It's happening today. And then from that, can Zelensky come to an agreement? Is Putin even willing to agree? We'll be following it and keeping you informed.